Hey folks, Gary Klein here, and I'm going to address a topic that I get questioned about an awful lot, because for those of you that follow the sport and listen to me talk a little bit, one term that you'll hear me use quite often is called speed reeling. And what I simply mean by speed reeling is a high rate of retrieve on the lures that I'm using to catch fish. You know, one of the things about anglers catching bass, about 80% of the bass that I catch during the course of my career did not bite my lure because they're actually actively feeding. I triggered something to make them curious, make them react. And speed reeling is one of those techniques that I use to get that fish to react. You know, bass are not like people. They can't pick it up, you know, and touch it and smell it and taste it and then set it back down. They have to stop it with their mouth. And then when we as the angler catch, we naturally think, oh, they're feeding. Not necessarily always that case. So speed reeling is a technique that I've been doing for years, and of course, you know, Rick Klein is really good at it also, and there's other anglers that have really picked up on it over the course of the year. But because I'm reeling a bait at a very fast retrieve, I've already eliminated some of the conditions where speed reeling is not any good. In other words, cold, dirty water. You might as well even forget about speed reeling. Speed reeling is playing off the visual of the fish, the sight of the fish. So I need relatively clean water to trigger a strike when I'm using a speed reeling technique. And there's not really any one bait that I use over any others for speed reeling, because again, you know, we're just bass fishermen, and you know, you have to use the right tool for the right conditions. But I will tell you this, that like, you know, speed reeling a crankbait, and this is a little Berkley 10.5 dredger. It's one of my favorite all-time speed reeling baits when I'm fishing clean water around aquatic vegetation. But all of your lures, you have to modify or make them track true, because anytime you speed reel, it will really over exemplify a mistuned bait. It's going to make it roll and walk. So you'll find that not all baits are very good speed reeling baits, but there's a lot of really good ones. So crankbaits, I speed reel those an awful lot. Of course, a lipless bait, which is a great speed reeling technique. This is the exact same lure, you can see how scarred up it is, that I used in the Major League Fishing heavy hitters on Toho. Post-spawn condition, the fish were on the outside weed clumps, at least the ones that I found. The water was Florida clear, and the only way I could trigger a strike is reel as hard as I could reel. So this rod and reel with 17-pound test, 100% fluorocarbon, and that bait is what carried me into the championship round. So anyhow, that was the technique that I was using to trigger those fish down there. But folks, you can use spinnerbaits. Spinnerbait's one of my favorite speed reeling, and this is just one of my hand-built spinnerbaits. But what you'll find with a spinnerbait, with the wire coming out of the head, there's a lot of good spinnerbaits on the market. When I'm speed reeling at a high rate of speed, I have to modify my wire angle, and I do that by just bending it out of the head a little bit. Because what you'll find you'll have to do is set the blade further back over the hook, and for some reason it acts like a keel or a rudder, and it keeps that bait tracking true, because I'm reeling real fast. And I fish our Berkley braid an awful lot. It's a very low stretch line, which allows me to make contact with these fish real good when a high rate of speed. But folks, really the concept of speed reeling, what it does is it allows me to cover water quick and trigger fish to bite. And it works really good on all three species of fish, you know, spotted bass, smallmouth, largemouth. But I do need clear or cleaner water in order for that technique to really work. But it's, God, there's so many times of the year where speed reeling really, I feel like I'm triggering fish that other anglers have never even thought about triggering. So let's kind of pick it up and talk about the equipment that's used. First of all, I think an angler needs a high-speed reel. And all a gear ratio is on a reel is inches per turn of the handle. And for those of you out there that are kind of like a numbers guy like I am, when I pulled away from the Major League Fishing Heavy Hitters Championship, driving back home to Texas, my mind was thinking, how much line did I actually reel in during that event? Because folks, I kept this one rod in my hands for 4 rounds of competition. Elimination, my knockout round, and my championship round. And folks, I took a 65-yard cast average, 2 per minute, times the 2.5 hours in the period, times 3 periods in the round. And folks, the numbers just blew me away. 2 65-yard casts a minute with 130 yards of line every minute that I reeled in. And folks, I'm reeling hard. Long casts, and I'm reeling really hard. And per period, I think that math worked out to like 19,500. I may be a little bit off, I'm just trying to remember. You know, times 3 was 54,500. Times 4 rounds was like, gosh, 234,000 yards of line that I reeled in over 4 rounds of competition, divided by a mile, and it ended up in 4 rounds of competition. I reeled in like 133 miles of line, and I was working hard at it. I mean, you know, you talk about putting calluses on your hand, but that was the only way that I could trigger those fish to bite. So I just stayed with it, and it carried me into the championship round. But let's just talk about gear ratios on a reel. There's ways that an angler can increase their gear retrieve in a reel simply by the diameter of the line that you use. If I have a full spool of large diameter line, my rate of retrieve is higher than a full spool of smaller diameter line, so you just figure that out on your own. I like to throw fluorocarbon, because fluorocarbon has obviously less stretch than monofilament. It's a great line for speed reeling. You get more of a positive contact on your hook set. And when I'm doing that, you know, I'll fish a parabolic bend rod, my old spinnerbait rod, and I also fish the braid, which has, you know, about a 1% stretch factor. These all come in good, but one thing about speed reeling, you know, you as the angler have to determine exactly the right setup based on your strengths and your conditions. Because like in Florida, for example, I was making extremely long casts. So instead of using my parabolic bend ducket rod, I ended up using our 710 Micro Magic, which is a medium heavier action with 17-pound test line, because for some weird reason, the majority of the strikes I received were in about the first 5 or 6 turns of the handle. And they're always at the extent of a 65, 70 yard cast. So I needed a little bit more to make sure I got a positive hook set. But most of the time I just use a parabolic bend casting rod, 7 foot, and I throw, like I said, fluorocarbon. I speed reel with 10-pound test line an awful lot, 12-pound test line. It doesn't matter, man. You're just trying to trigger that bass to bite. Well, let's just talk about the heavy hitters, because okay, you know that right there, the heavy hitters event is the one that really kind of triggered all this. You know, again, I'm throwing a lipless bait. I'm making extremely long casts. And for all you bass fishermen out there that have hooked a fish at the extent of a cast, know that you have a hard time getting a good positive hook in that fish. So what I did is I just beefed the action up in the rod, and I went to almost an 8 foot. This particular rod is 710 in length, and it's a medium heavy, and I was throwing it on 17-pound test Berkeley 100% fluorocarbon. So that gave me a real positive pull in a long cast. And I was using our Ducket Paradigm reel. It was a high-speed 8.3 to 1 retrieve. So I tried to put all those factors into play. Of course, you know, higher retrieve reel, I don't have to turn the handle quite as much, but yet I was burning as hard as I could reel. And that right there was the combo that worked for me there. And I've had many other events in the past where I'm speed reeling a spinnerbait, and I'm not using a heavy action rod. I'm using a parabolic bend rod with 30-pound test braid, you know, Berkeley braid. I got a real low stretch line, but I get a real positive hook set. All I'm trying to do, all I'm trying as an angler to accomplish, is create a technique to pull the fish to the bait. All I want them to do is react, because when they grab it, I just trigger them to grab it. They probably weren't hungry at all, but when it landed, boom, they got it, and I catch them. As you can see, this right here is the Berkeley lipless that we have. It's our war pit, and this bait tracks real true, and it's got just a great noise to it. You can pump it. I work it, you know, it's got a real good swim back to it. It's just a good all-around lipless bait. And for those of you that fish around aquatic vegetation, you know, either early season when the water's cold or late when it's warmer, a lipless always works. It's a bait that you can fish shallow, deep, fast, slow. You can you know, yo-yo it, you can rip it out of the grass, and it's just a great tool to catch bass. So that right there was one of my keys in fishing that Florida event. I mean, and it also was a bait that gave me the opportunity to make a long cast. I mean, you know, even in the wind, I can fire this thing like into the next county, and the fish were just triggering off of it. So I don't know what it is, and I've seen places across this country, just not in Florida, where that same technique works so good, but yet a lot of angler, it's work. When you start reeling a bait as hard as you can physically reel it, and then reel it some more, because I reel probably faster than most people would ever imagine. You never imagine a bass biting a bait coming through the water that fast, but they do, and they bite it very well.